to do lesson 3 of the Medieval Ages, which is about popes and kings, and this starts on page 680 of your social studies textbook. So we're going to start with If You Were There. You are one of the children of the King of France. One day your father announces that he wants to make an alliance with a powerful noble family. To seal the alliance, he has arranged for you to marry one of his new allies' children. Your father wants you to be happy and asks what you think of the idea. You know the alliance will make your father's rule more secure, but it means leaving home to marry a stranger. What will you say to your father? Popes and kings rule Europe. In the Middle Ages, great nobles and their knights held a great deal of power. As time passed, though, this power began to shift. More and more power came into the hands of two types of leaders, popes and kings. Popes had great spiritual power, and kings had political power. Together, popes and kings controlled most of European society. The power of the popes. In the Middle Ages, the Pope was the head of the Christian Church in Western Europe. Since nearly everyone in the Middle Ages belonged to this church, the Pope had great power. Many people saw the Pope as God's representative on earth. They looked to him for guidance about how to live and pray. Because the Pope was seen as God's representative, it was his duty to decide what the church would teach. From time to time, a pope would write a letter called a bull to explain a religious teaching or outline a church policy. In addition, the pope decided when someone was acting against the church. If the pope felt someone was working against the church, he could punish the person in many ways. For serious offenses, the pope or other bishops could choose to excommunicate or cast out from the church the offender. The punishment was deeply feared because Christians believed that a person who died while excommunicated would not get into heaven. In addition to spiritual power, many popes had great political power. After the Roman Empire collapsed, many people in Italy looked to the Pope as their leader. As a result, some popes began to live like royalty. They became rich and built huge palaces. At the same time, they came into conflict with Europe's other political leaders, kings. The power of kings. Europe in 1000 was divided into small states. Most of these states were ruled by kings, some of whom had little real power. In a few places, though, kings had begun to take control of their countries. Look at the map to find England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. At this time, Europe's most powerful kings ruled those three countries. So we can see England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. And then, of course, we have Rome down here, inside Italy. In England and France, kings inherited their thrones from their fathers. At times, nobles rebelled against the kings, but the kings usually re-established order fairly quickly. They maintained this order through alliances as well as warfare. The Holy Roman Empire. In the Holy Roman Empire, however, the situation was different. This empire grew out of what had been Charlemagne's empire. As you read earlier, Charlemagne built his empire in the 700s with the Pope's approval. In the mid-900s, another emperor took the throne with the approval of the Pope. Because the empire was approved by the Pope and people saw it as a rebirth of the Roman Empire, it became known as the Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman emperors didn't inherit their crowns. Instead, they were elected by the empire's nobles. Sometimes, these elections led to fights between nobles and the emperor. In the worst of these squabbles, emperors had to call on the Pope for help. Popes fight for power. Although the people of Western Europe considered the Pope the head of the Church, people in Eastern Europe disagreed. Their bishops controlled religious matters with little or no guidance from the Pope. Beginning in the mid-1000s, however, a series of clever and able popes sought to increase their authority over Eastern bishops. They believed all religious officials should answer to the Pope. Among those who believed this was Pope Leo IX, who became Pope in 1049. He argued that because the first Pope, St. Peter, had been the leader of the whole Christian Church, later popes should be as well. Despite Leo's arguments, many bishops in Eastern Europe, most notably the Bishop of Constantinople, wouldn't recognize his authority. In 1054, Leo decided to excommunicate that bishop. Leo's decision created a permanent split within the Church. Christians who agreed with the Bishop of Constantinople formed the Orthodox Church. Those who supported Leo's authority became known as Roman Catholics. This became known as the Great Schism. A schism is a split or division among people. With their support, the Pope became head of the Roman Catholic Church and one of the most powerful figures in Western Europe. Another schism occurred in the late 1300s and early 1400s. In 1309, the Pope moved from Rome to Avignon, France. Roman Catholic popes remained there for about 70 years. Eventually, the Pope returned to Rome. However, some religious leaders did not agree with the new Roman Pope, Urban VI. Instead, they elected their own Pope, Clement VII, who ruled from France. Starting in 1378, some Roman Catholics obeyed the Pope in Rome. Others obeyed the Pope in France. This schism was finally resolved by the Roman Catholic Church in 1417. The Pope was to remain in Rome. Kings and popes clash. As popes worked to increase their power, they often came into conflict with kings. For example, kings thought they should be able to select bishops in other countries. Popes, on the other hand, argued that only they could choose religious officials. In 1073, a new pope came to power in Rome. His name was Pope Gregory VII. Trouble arose when Gregory disapproved of a bishop chosen by the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV. Angry because the Pope questioned his authority, Henry convinced Germany's bishops that they should remove Gregory as Pope. In response, the Pope excommunicated Henry. He called on the empire's nobles to overthrow Henry. Desperate to stay in power, Henry went to Italy to ask the Pope for forgiveness. Gregory refused to see him. For 3 days, Henry stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle where Pope Gregory was staying. Eventually, Gregory accepted Henry's apology and allowed the emperor back into the church. Gregory had proven himself more powerful than the emperor, at least for that moment. The fight over the right to choose bishops continued even after Henry and Gregory died. In 1122, a new pope and emperor reached a compromise. They decided that church officials would choose all bishops and abbots. The bishops and abbots, however, would still have to obey the emperor. This compromise did not end all conflict. Kings and popes continued to fight for power throughout the Middle Ages, changing lives all over Europe. As a recap, in this lesson you read about the powers of popes and kings. In many cases, these powers led to conflict between the two. In the next lesson, though, you will read about popes and kings working together against a common enemy.